Welcome to our channel. Today we're diving into a really fascinating book. It's called Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by Susan Cain.
Oh, yeah, I love this one.
Yeah, it's really interesting how it kind of like flips the script on what we think we know about success and personality and all that.
Absolutely. Kane's main argument is that introversion, which is often seen as something to be, overcome or something like that, is actually a very powerful strength,
Yeah.
especially in our world.
Mhm.
Our loud, fast-paced, everything's got to be,
Yeah.
extroverted kind of world.
Right. It challenges that whole idea that to get ahead, you have to be like the life of the party, right?
Exactly. Kane actually calls that the extrovert ideal. This idea that, that the ideal person is this outgoing, charismatic, always networking and, kind of person.
Right, right.
And she traces this ideal back to historical shifts, like the rise of corporate America, in the early 20th century. And so it became really important not just to be competent at your job, but to have the right personality to climb the ladder.
So it's not just what you know, but how you present yourself kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. It makes me think about all of those like classic self-help books from that era.
Oh, totally. Like Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Right.
That was like a huge bestseller in the 1930s.
Mm.
And it was all about like, outward charm and like mastering social skills.
Yeah.
And, this focus on personality like really took off in the 20th century. And Kane argues that it's created this cultural bias against introverts.
Yeah. And it's not just in the business world either, right? It seems like it kind of seeps into everything, like even education or social settings.
Totally. Kane gives the example of classroom dynamics often favoring the extroverted students,
Right.
those who, participate actively, and that often leaves introverted students feeling kind of overlooked, even if they have really insightful things to say.
Yeah. I relate to that. I can remember, feeling like I had to perform in class, even when I wasn't really comfortable speaking up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can be really tough, especially for introverted children who are told, come out of your shell or be more sociable.
Right.
It's just,
So speaking of challenges, one area where Kane really kind of pushes back is in this realm of leadership.
yeah.
We often associate leadership with charisma and, having this really commanding presence.
Yeah.
But Kane says that introverted leaders can be really effective too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
She points to figures like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett,
Right.
who are not exactly known for being these super flamboyant personalities, but who have achieved massive success.
Yeah. And what's interesting is she doesn't just use anecdotes. She actually backs up her claims with research.
Oh, yeah. She cites studies like Professor Adam Grant's work on leadership styles.
Okay. What kind of research are we talking about?
So Grant found that introverted leaders often excel in managing proactive teams.
Oh, that's interesting. So like a team full of go-getters, you'd think they'd need a really, assertive, take-charge leader. But
Right. That's what you would think.
yeah, but she's saying that that's not the case.
Yeah, he found that the introverted leaders are often better at listening to and empowering their team members.
Okay.
Because they're not constantly trying to dominate the conversation.
Right.
They're actually creating space for other people to step up and contribute their ideas.
So it's not about being the loudest voice in the room, but about creating the space for everybody to feel valued and heard.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
And this ability to listen deeply and empower others is like a theme throughout her book.
Yeah.
It speaks to the unique strength that introverts have.
That reminds me of this YouTube channel, Affirmify Journey,
Yeah.
I think it is. They have some great content specifically for introverts. It's all about embracing your quiet strengths and all that. It's worth checking out if you want a little inspiration boost.
That's a great suggestion.
Yeah. So beyond leadership, Kane also kind of dives into the biological underpinnings of introversion.
Yeah.
And she highlights research by Dr. Jerome Kagan, who studied high reactive children.
Yes.
So these are children who are more sensitive to stimulation and novelty, from a very young age.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that. What does it mean to be high reactive? Is that just a fancy way of saying shy or?
Well, it's a little bit more nuanced than that.
Okay.
High reactive children tend to have a more sensitive nervous system,
Okay.
which means that they react more strongly to new experiences, loud noises, even, certain fabrics, things like that.
So it's not just about being socially reserved.
Mm-hmm.
It's about having like a different level of sensitivity to the world around them.
Yeah.
Okay, does this sensitivity last into adulthood?
It does, and there's even neurological evidence for it.
Oh, wow.
Dr. Carl Schwartz used fMRI scans to show that the amygdalas, the parts of the brain that process emotions, are more active in high reactive people
Okay.
when they're exposed to new stimuli.
Wow, so there's a real measurable difference in brain activity.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
It is, and it suggests that these temperamental differences that we see in children aren't just phases, you know? They're rooted in biology and can have a lasting impact on how people experience the world.
It makes you wonder, like, how much of our personality is hardwired versus shaped by our experiences.
It's a really complex interplay,
Yeah.
and Cain explores both sides of that equation.
Oh.
You know, while she acknowledges the biological basis of introversion, she also says our environment and our experiences really shape who we become.
So it's not just nature versus nurture, it's both.
It's both.
Yeah. And I guess that understanding is really crucial, especially when it comes to like raising introverted children,
Right.
because parents often feel this pressure to fix their introverted kids.
Yeah, make them more outgoing and gregarious.
Right, exactly.
But Cain says that can really backfire.
Yeah, it seems like accepting and supporting their natural temperament would be a much healthier approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Instead of trying to force an introverted child to be an extrovert,
Right.
parents can help them to understand and embrace their unique strengths.
So how can parents create an environment that truly supports introverted children?
Yeah.
Like, what are some practical steps that they can take?
That's a great question, and Cain talks about that in her book. She talks about the importance of creating what she calls restorative niches for introverted children.
Okay.
These are like quiet spaces where they can recharge and just feel comfortable being themselves.
That makes sense.
Hmm.
We all need those spaces, I think, but probably even more important for introverts who are so easily overstimulated.
Right, and these restorative niches can be all kinds of things. It could be a cozy reading nook in their bedroom, a quiet spot in the backyard, or even just a designated quiet time during the day where they can just be alone with their thoughts.
It's about giving them the space and permission to recharge in a way that works for them.
Exactly, and this applies not just to children, but to adults too.
Right.
You know, we all need to create those restorative niches in our lives.
Especially in today's world, yeah.
Especially today.
Yeah.
And that's where Cain's insights are really valuable, because she helps us understand that it's not selfish to prioritize our need for quiet and solitude.
Right.
It's essential for our well-being.
Yeah, and it's about recognizing that we're not all wired the same way, and that's okay.
Exactly.
In fact, that diversity temperament is what makes the world so interesting.
It does.
So this brings us to one of Cain's most important points, the power of solitude.
Yes.
This is where we really start to see how introversion can be a source of strength. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
She challenges this popular notion that constant collaboration and brainstorming are the keys to creativity and innovation. She says that solitude is just as crucial, if not more so, for deep thinking and problem solving.
It's that idea that sometimes you need to just step away from the noise and distraction to really tap into your best ideas.
Exactly, and she gives some really compelling examples of how this works in practice. Well, she talks about Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple.
Yeah.
He famously created the first Apple computer working alone in his garage, for hours on end.
Oh, yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah.
It shows that solitude isn't about being antisocial or avoiding collaboration altogether. It's about recognizing we all need that time and space to think deeply and creatively.
Exactly. And Cain says this is especially true for introverts.
Yeah.
Who often thrive in environments where they can focus without interruption and process information at their own pace.
So it's about finding that balance, right? Between collaboration and solitude.
Exactly.
Knowing when to engage with others and when to step back and recharge.
Right. And this leads us to another really important aspect of her book, her insights on communication styles.
Okay.
She talks about how introverts and extroverts communicate differently and how to bridge those gaps to build stronger relationships. She talks about sociolinguist Deborah Tannen, who found that men and women often have different communication styles, and that those differences can sometimes lead to misunderstandings.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that in my own relationships.
Oh, yeah, totally. It's not that one style is better than the other,
Right.
but that understanding these differences can be really key.
So how does that play out between introverts and extroverts then?
Well, for example, introverts often prefer to think things through before speaking up,
Okay.
while extroverts tend to kind of process information out loud.
So an extrovert might jump right into a conversation, while an introvert might take a moment to gather their thoughts.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this can create a dynamic where the extrovert feels like the introvert isn't really engaged,
Right.
while the introvert feels rushed.
I could see how that would be frustrating on both sides.
Yeah, definitely. Does Cain offer any suggestions for how to navigate those differences?
She does. She emphasizes the importance of creating space for both types of communication.
Okay.
So for introverts, it's about learning to articulate their needs and finding ways to share their thoughts even when they haven't had a lot of time to process. And for extroverts, it's about being mindful of the introvert's need for that reflection time.
Yes.
And giving them the space to formulate their responses.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that these differences aren't personal.
Right.
It's just different ways of interacting with the world.
Yeah, this reminds me of when Cain talks about cultural differences.
Yes.
Particularly between like Western and Asian cultures.
Yes.
It seems like there's some parallels there.
Absolutely. Cain points out that a lot of Asian cultures place a higher value on quietude and introspection,
Okay.
whereas Western cultures tend to prize being assertive and expressive.
So even within the category of introversion, there can be cultural nuances that affect how people express themselves.
Yeah, for sure.
It's interesting, Cain talks about Asian American students in Cupertino, California,
Yes.
who do really well in a school environment that values quiet diligence.
Yeah.
But then those same students can really struggle when they go to college, which is often a much more westernized setting,
Right.
where participation and outspokenness is really rewarded.
It's interesting how our definition of good communication is
Right.
influenced by our culture.
So how do we create spaces that are inclusive of all those different communication styles?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Regardless of your background or your personality.
It seems like it goes back to Cain's point about the need for balance,
Yes.
not just in our individual lives,
Yeah.
but in society as a whole.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that both introversion and extroversion have their strengths.
Right.
And we need both of those to really thrive.
Cain even says that introverted qualities might be especially valuable in times of crisis,
Yes.
or, when we're dealing with really complex challenges.
She uses the 2008 financial crisis as an example.
Oh, interesting.
And she kind of suggests that the culture on Wall Street, the risk-taking and bravado, which is often associated with extroversion,
Right.
that contributed to the whole meltdown.
And then you have someone like Warren Buffett, who is very quiet and analytical.
Right.
He weathered the storm a lot better.
Exactly. And Cain argues that Buffett's success is partly due to his ability to think independently, to resist groupthink, and to focus on the long term.
It really is a powerful counterpoint to that idea that you have to be loud and assertive to succeed,
It is.
especially in finance.
Right.
Yeah, and this ties into Cain's idea that we really need to rethink our assumptions about leadership.
Yes.
True leadership isn't always about, charisma or commanding a room.
It can be about quiet confidence
Right.
and thoughtful deliberation.
And empowering others.
Exactly.
And those are qualities that are often found in introverts.
Yes.
It makes you wonder if we've been overlooking a whole pool of talented leaders just because they don't fit the stereotype.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about.
Right. And it's a reminder that diversity is so important.
Yes.
Not just, in terms of race and gender,
Yeah.
but in personality too.
Absolutely. For any organization or society to really flourish, you need that diversity.
This brings us back to Cain's restorative niches, which we talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
I want to hear more about how that idea can be applied in different situations.
Well, as we said, it's important for both introverts and extroverts to have those spaces where they can recharge.
Right.
But Cain goes beyond the individual needs.
Okay.
She says relationships can also benefit from creating these restorative niches.
Interesting. How so?
She talks about the importance of what she calls free trade agreements in relationships.
Free trade agreements. I'm not familiar with that term.
Basically, it's about partners acknowledging and respecting each other's need for either social engagement or solitude, even if those needs are different.
So, for example, if one partner is an introvert who needs quiet time after work,
Right.
and the other partner is an extrovert who wants to go out and socialize,
Yeah.
they could have a free trade agreement where they both honor each other's needs.
Exactly. It's about finding a compromise that works for both people, rather than one person always having to accommodate the other.
Sounds like a great way to prevent resentment and to build a more harmonious relationship.
Yeah, it's a good example of how Cain's ideas can be applied to everyday life,
Right.
not just in work or social settings.
in our most intimate relationships, too.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's about understanding and respecting that we all have different needs and preferences.
Right.
And those differences can make relationships really interesting and enriching.
Absolutely. And speaking of enriching relationships, Cain also talks about those challenges that come up when communication styles clash.
Oh yeah, that could be a real source of friction.
It can be, but she offers some really practical advice for both introverts and extroverts
Okay.
on how to deal with those challenges.
Like what?
Well, for introverts, she says it's really important to learn to express your needs assertively,
Okay.
even if you tend to avoid confrontation.
So finding that balance between honoring your need for quiet,
Yes,
but also speaking up when it's important.
exactly. And for extroverts, she talks about the power of active listening
Right.
and creating space for those pauses in conversation.
It's about recognizing that communication isn't always about filling the silence.
Right.
Sometimes it's about giving space for reflection.
Exactly. And this goes for all kinds of relationships, family, friends, colleagues.
It's about creating that culture of respect
Yes.
where different styles are valued and appreciated.
And that leads us to one of Cain's most important takeaways. Introversion is not a weakness.
Mm-hmm.
It's a strength to be embraced and leveraged.
Yeah, it seems like she's really advocating for a more nuanced view of personality.
Yeah.
One that goes beyond, that simple introvert-extrovert dichotomy.
That's right. She says we all exist on a spectrum,
Mhm.
and even within those categories, there's a lot of variation.
It's not about putting people in boxes.
No.
It's about recognizing that human personality is complex and,
And appreciating the unique strengths.
and appreciating all those different strengths.
Yeah.
So this makes me think about Cain's advice for introverts,
Yeah.
navigating a world that often feels like it's made for extroverts.
Yeah.
What are some of her suggestions?
Well, she talks about, understanding your own needs
Okay.
and creating those restorative niches we talked about.
So recognizing when you need to step back and recharge.
Yes.
And giving yourself permission to do that.
And finding ways to use your introverted strengths,
Yeah.
like your ability to focus deeply,
Right.
think critically, and listen carefully.
So it's not about trying to be someone you're not.
No.
It's about figuring out how to thrive as your authentic self.
Exactly.
She also gives some practical tips
Yeah.
for introverts
Mm-hmm.
on how to communicate better in social and professional settings.
Right.
I'd love to hear some of those. What are her suggestions?
Well, she says preparation is really important.
Okay.
So, for example, if you're going to be in a meeting and, you'll have to speak up,
Right.
take some time beforehand to think about what you want to say
Okay.
and rehearse it.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's like anticipating those situations that are outside your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And just preparing yourself.
Yeah. And she also suggests finding allies
Okay.
and mentors who can
Mm.
help you in those situations.
It's about building a support system
Yes.
of people who understand your strengths.
Exactly. And remembering you don't have to do it alone.
So this goes back to her whole message about self-acceptance
It does.
and, finding your tribe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that introversion isn't a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's just a different way of being.
And there are people who will appreciate you for that.
Exactly. And for anyone who wants to explore these ideas further
Yeah.
or find resources on personal growth or communication skills,
Mhm.
I recommend checking out lingopediamagazine.com.
That's a great resource. They have all sorts of courses and ebooks.
Yes, they do.
That might be especially helpful for introverts.
Yeah. And of course, we highly recommend Quiet by Susan Cain.
It's a really great book.
It is.
It can change how you see yourself and the world.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive,
Yeah.
please subscribe, share, and like this podcast.
We love sharing these ideas with you.
We do.
As a final thought,
Mm-hmm.
what steps can you take to embrace your own introversion?
Yeah.
Or to better understand the introverts in your life?
It's something to think about.
It is. It's a great question. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.